doesn't have all the citations that I need, but I think I should be able to edit around that. Ready? Alright, so here we are at the second adaptation project. Now this is a story I've always seen on bookshelves and classrooms for my whole life, and yet I never bothered to pick it up. It's an enchanting tale about a woman coming into her own and learning what it means to live life for herself and experience life to the fullest. Honestly, once I started listening to this audiobook by Zora Neale Hurston, I was unable to put it down. Unfortunately, some of the greatest aspects of this book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, didn't survive its translation to film, but it could be argued that what we do see on the screen before us serves to build upon the foundation that the original texts had left behind. Thankfully, we have a lens like intertextuality to help make that argument for us. One of the themes that stays intact regardless of what version of the text you experience is the way the characters use their own lens of respectability politics to examine Jamie's reactions, or to examine Jamie's actions throughout the story. Politics of respectability is a set of beliefs holding that conformity to prescribed mainstream standards of appearance and behavior will protect the person who is part of a marginalized group, especially black folks, from prejudices and systematic injustices. A classic moment of this is in the story comes early on, where Janie's grandmother forces her to get married to an older man named Logan after she catches her kissing the boy from down the street. Although it seems cruel in the moment, her grandmother was only trying to protect her in her own way. See, she was terrified that her granddaughter awakening as a sexual being would invite all sorts of misfortune upon her, just like it did to her mother before her. If you insist on having tempestuous thoughts, then you must first become an honest woman. This is a direct quote from Janie's grandmother early on in the book, and, at chapter blank. Sadly, Janie's grandmother didn't believe her granddaughter could be both happy and free as a woman, but given how both she and her daughter's lives turned out, I can't quite place the blame directly on her alone. Although for a fan of the film only, all of this nuance about the histories of both Janie's mother and grandmother may as well be non-existent, but for a reader of both texts, it adds valuable context. But Janie's confrontation with her grandmother remains virtually unchanged in pretty much both versions, save for the time of day it takes place. In the book, the confrontation about her kissing comes at night, whereas in the movie it's like the middle of the day practically. See, the character's use of respectability politics something like a barometer to tell if an action Janie is taking is acceptable or not. We see this early on when Janie's grandmother is confronting her granddaughter's adolescent lust, and again later on once she becomes married to Joseph Starks. Once Joe gains his status as a respectable mayor of Edenville, he begins to crack down more and more on the types of behavior he will allow Janie, his wife, to display in public. In the novel, it was mule talk. In the film, I guess we could call it checkerboard talk, which is the activity the townsfolk of Edenville engage on the front porch of the general store once it's built. In the book, mule talk refers to this character in the book who has this old mule that don't do no work, is completely lazy, and they would all just gather around and take turns making up stories about the mule. Janie herself thought of a few stories she thought was pretty funny, but due to Joe and his attitude that it would not be respectable for a woman of her stature to engage in such low talk, she wasn't allowed to participate, even though it all looked like great fun. After all, he didn't mean for nobody else's wife to rank with her. She must look on herself as the bell cow, and that other women were the gang. In Joe's mind, respectability politics demands that his wife function as a beautiful status symbol, never too far away so that the others know she belongs to him, yet never so close that the peasants get to interact with her directly. Over the course of the 20 years Janie stayed married to Joe Starks, we watched as they struggled with this dynamic for years, but a good chunk of that is relegated to just the original text. I'd argue that this is because the film version of the story was intentionally adapted through a lens of intertextuality. Several things are only alluded to when the original novel went into much more depth. For instance, it's left vague whether or not Janie and Tea-Cake ever got married in the film. Sure, she brings up that he asked for her hand at one point, but she immediately says no. "I'm enjoying my freedom too much," she replies in the film. She even claims that she'll never get married again. But given the transition to the Everglades after Tea-Cake steals her money when they first run her off, anything could have happened. This is one of those times where knowledge of the book enhances and builds upon the experience of the film. Another more blatant example is Janie's entire time at the Everglades altogether, which was mostly glossed over in the film. But if you're familiar with the book, it's possible to fill in the blanks of her time there. Tea-Cake's death, for instance, is way more ambiguous in the film than it is in the original text. I suppose Darnell Martin, the director, wanted to leave it up to the audience if Janie is the one who kills Tea-Cakes or not. And honestly, when I first saw the movie as a child, I was convinced that Tea-Cakes had killed himself in order to protect Janie. But with the additional context that the novel provides, it makes the overall themes of the film much more potent by building on what's already on screen while allowing the imagination to still serve as the ultimate director.